What if a blind date gone wrong led you straight into the life of the one person who would change everything? Hannah Cole hadn't been on a date in 7 years. A widowed mother with bills piling high and a mother slipping into Alzheimer's. She wasn't looking for love. She was just trying to stay afloat. But when she sits at the wrong table in a quiet Vermont cafe, she unknowingly begins a conversation with a stranger who isn't just kind, he's her future boss. Grant Whitmore is a millionaire CEO still haunted by the loss of his wife. He came to town to rebuild a life, not to fall for someone again, especially not his new assistant with too many secrets behind her tired eyes. What unfolds isn't just romance, it's about second chances, quiet trust, and the invisible battles people carry. Can two people with broken pasts find something whole together? And how much of love is a choice when it begins with a mistake? If this kind of storytelling touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin the story. The secretary thought it was just a blind date and was shocked to meet her millionaire boss. Hannah Cole hadn't gone on a date in over 7 years. The last time she wore makeup that wasn't for a funeral. The last time she ironed a blouse just to look nice for someone had been before the accident. That night in late March had taken more than her husband. It had taken the part of her that believed in beginnings. But tonight wasn't about romance. It wasn't even about hope. It was about showing up. Just that. Her best friend Rachel had insisted she try. Not for them, Rachel had said, pressing a slip of paper with the cafe's name into her hand. For you, for once. So there she was, outside the Sparrow Cafe, coat buttoned too high, breath fogging in the brisk Vermont air. The sky above Bradford was already dusky, the town's holiday lights blinking faintly against the early November dark. The cafe windows glowed warm, amber-like, as if offering safety from everything she feared inside. She walked in slowly, her heels clicking faintly on the wooden floor. Her eyes scanned the room, heart pounding with the kind of nervousness that didn't feel young, it felt fragile. She didn't know who she was looking for. Rachel had only said, "Look for a man in a gray coat with a book. Near the back corner, by the window, sat a man late 40s, maybe early 50s, clean cut, salt and pepper hair, gray wool coat draped neatly on the back of his chair. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't fidgeting, just sitting there with a hardcover book. Flipping pages like time wasn't something he rushed through." She hesitated. Was it him? Her legs made the decision before her head did. "Hi," she said quietly, standing at the edge of the table. The man looked up. His eyes were a soft blue kind, maybe a little tired. He didn't seem surprised. He gave a polite smile and closed the book. "Hello." They sat. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. It was almost comforting, that omission. The conversation meandered, nothing deep, but not small talk either. They spoke about coffee and how Vermont winters arrived like old relatives too early and always overstaying their welcome. They mentioned books they half remembered and songs that used to play on the radio during long drives. There was something gentle about him. He spoke slowly, but not lazily. His laugh, when it came, was low and rare, like something earned. Hannah found herself not smiling, but softening. At one point, he excused himself to get a refill. That's when she noticed the book. It lay open, spine up, pages curling slightly from use. Slipped between chapters was a card, cream-colored, handwritten in neat cursive. It read, "Happy birthday, Mom. Love you always." Beside the card, tucked deeper into the book, was a small photograph. A woman with silver hair and a weathered smile, standing in front of a porch full of pumpkins. Hannah blinked. Wait, this wasn't a date. This wasn't her person. Her heart skipped first in embarrassment, then in quiet horror. Had she just sat down at a stranger's table? She glanced towards the counter. The man, whoever he really was still waiting for his coffee, hands in pockets, calm as ever. She stood slowly, slid her chair back. Her mind buzzed with a dozen apologies she didn't dare say aloud. The words stuck like honey in her throat. She made it to the door before he turned around. She didn't look back, at least not until she was outside, her breath shaking in the cold, from the sidewalk. She stole a glance through the window. He had returned to the table, his coffee in one hand, book in the other. No confusion, no anger, just a flicker of amusement. Maybe. As he opened the book again, light from the pendant lamp above caught his face. It was a kind face, familiar, somehow. And then she remembered the company email that morning, the internal newsletter Rachel always forwarded. There had been a section welcoming the new CEO of Remedex, a photo, a name, Grant Whitmore. Hannah froze. Her heart did that thing again, stuttered and spun. That man. She hadn't just mistaken a stranger for a date. She had mistaken her new boss. She hadn't expected to see him again, let alone on the elevator the very next morning inside the building she worked in every single day. The stainless steel doors slid open with a gentle hiss, and there he was, the same man from the Sparrow Cafe, the book reader, the not-so-blind date, the accidental stranger. Now, the newly appointed CEO of Remedex. Hannah stood frozen in place as the doors remained open just a second too long. Grant stepped in, wearing a charcoal suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. His expression was unreadable at first, until he looked her way and nodded once, calm, composed. That same slight tilt of his head, like he already knew something she didn't. She managed a polite smile and lowered her gaze, stepping slightly to the side, clutching her folder against her chest as if it could shield her from whatever this moment was becoming. It was a short ride, 4 floors, yet it felt endless. The elevator hummed quietly as it ascended. No one else was inside, just the subtle tap of his shoe, the rustle of a page in the file she pretended to read, and the unbearable weight of recognition hanging in the air between them. When the doors opened again, he stepped out first, didn't say a word. But just before turning the corner, he glanced back over his shoulder and offered her a small, almost amused smile. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't casual either. And Hannah knew, without any real confirmation, that he absolutely remembered her. The office buzzed with morning energy, emails pinging, printers humming, staff murmuring about quarterly reports. But Hannah felt like she was walking through fog. Her mind replayed every word from the night before, every awkward glance, every assumption she'd made, the photograph, the birthday card, the way she had bolted out of that cafe like a teenager caught sneaking out. She slid into her cubicle, a modest corner near the window, with a potted peace lily and a photo of Lily, her daughter, grinning in rain boots. She sat down slowly, letting the familiarity of her chair, her coffee mug, her routines ground her. At least this was still hers, her little corner of predictable. But peace didn't last long. Within an hour, an email pinged in her inbox. Subject team restructuring. Immediate attendance required. She blinked. The sender executive office. Heart thudding. She grabbed her notepad and joined the stream of employees, heading towards the 10th floor boardroom. Inside, the air was colder, cleaner. Everything here smelled of professionalism and something vaguely citrus. Grant stood at the front of the room, sleeves rolled just enough to look intentional. He greeted the group with a brief nod before diving into organizational changes, restructuring, and a new focus on operational transparency. Hannah did her best not to make eye contact. Then came the curveball. As part of this transition, he said, eyes scanning the room, I'll be appointing a personal executive secretary. Someone from within who's already familiar with our internal systems. We need trust and efficiency from day one. She didn't think much of it, not until she heard her name. Hannah Cole. The air shifted. She looked up, stunned. He didn't elaborate, didn't smile, just stated it like a business decision. A few glances from co-workers flickered her way, but no one whispered, "Not here, not now." After the meeting, she approached her manager, voice low. "I'm not sure this is a good idea. Maybe someone else would." Her manager cut her off gently. Grant was clear. He wants someone dependable. You've been here 9 years. Hannah. No one else even came close. She nodded slowly. Gratitude mixed uncomfortably with dread. Back at her desk, she stared at her computer screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard, unmoving. Her tea had gone cold beside her. A part of her wanted to believe this was all merit-based, that he had simply looked through HR files, picked the most qualified, and moved on. But another part, the louder part, remembered his eyes on the elevator, the cafe, the card in his book, the photo of his mother. The moment he realized she wasn't the person he'd expected and didn't mind, had he known, then was this coincidence or choice? Her stomach twisted at the thought. By mid-afternoon, an assistant delivered a small welcome packet to her desk, new ID badge, security codes, and a handwritten note from Grant, 4 words only. Looking forward to working. No signature, no smiley face, just pen on paper, crisp and intentional. She tucked the note into her drawer and closed it quietly, as if locking away the questions swirling inside her. That evening, walking to her car beneath a sky painted in shades of late autumn, she couldn't shake the one thought looping endlessly in her mind. Why me, not in fear, not in pride, but something else entirely. Most bosses barked orders. Grant Whitmore brewed tea. The thought crossed Hannah's mind on a Thursday morning when she arrived again 5 minutes late. She hated it. Hated the way her breath caught when she glanced at the clock on her screen. Hated how even on days she tried to leave early, something always stalled her. A misplaced lunchbox, a last-minute call from her mother's nurse, a shoelace that refused to be tied. But Grant never said anything, not once. Instead, he'd greet her with a small nod, already seated at his desk, reading through reports or tapping out an email with quiet focus. He didn't tap his watch or raise an eyebrow. He didn't comment at all. And somehow, that made it worse, like his silence left room for her own guilt to echo louder. They fell into a rhythm, the kind that surprised her with how quickly it became familiar. She managed his calendar, coordinated meetings with clinical partners, summarized investor updates. He in turn, never micromanaged, never hovered. Occasionally, he'd slide a paperclip across her desk without looking up, or murmur a thank you when she handed him a revised memo. These exchanges were small, almost invisible, but they built something steady, measured, safe. It was during one of those ordinary mornings that the unexpected happened. Hannah had been fighting off a sore throat for 2 days. Nothing dramatic, just a dryness that clung to her voice and made swallowing uncomfortable. She'd been sipping lukewarm water and avoiding conversation as much as she could. Around 10, she returned from the copier and found something new on her desk: a ceramic mug, steam rising softly, the smell of ginger, no note, no explanation. She looked up. Grant was standing near the window, reading something on his tablet. He didn't acknowledge her glance, didn't point to the mug or make a show of anything, just kept reading. Like placing it there had been the most natural thing in the world. She touched the mug with both hands. It was still hot. Her throat tightened not from the soreness, but from the kind of gratitude that caught you off guard. The kind that reminded you how long it had been since someone noticed and did something about it. Later that afternoon, when most of the office had cleared out for a department lunch, she lingered behind under the pretense of finishing a report. Grant stayed too. The quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full, like a room gently filled with light through old curtains. She broke the silence first. "Thank you for the tea." He looked up slowly, eyes meeting hers. "Ginger helps with inflammation," he said simply, then paused. "My wife used to swear by it." Something shifted. She hadn't expected that. Not the mention of a wife, not the past tense. "I didn't know you were married," she said softly. He gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was. She passed 8 years ago last month." There was a long beat. She didn't rush to fill it. "How long were you together?" she asked. "Finally." 15 years, he replied. "We met in college." She was studying art history. I was pre-med but dropped it before second year. She told me I was more suited to fixing systems than people. He laughed once dry, restrained, then added, "Turns out she was right." Hannah watched him closely. His posture didn't betray much. Hands relaxed on the desk, eyes steady. But there was a softness in his voice now, something unguarded. "She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer," he continued. "We had 8 months. From the moment they found it to the end," his words hung in the air, heavy and clean. "I'm sorry," Hannah said quietly. He nodded once, a gesture of acceptance more than gratitude. "You don't have to be." A few seconds passed. "Did she like tea?" Hannah asked, surprising herself. Grant's face softened. She collected it. Had tins from everywhere: Moroccan mint, Ceylon black, you name it. Our pantry looked like a tea shop exploded. A flicker of warmth crossed his face, the kind that only comes with memory that hurts and heals at once. "She sounds lovely," Hannah said. "She was," he replied, then looked at her with a gaze that felt oddly intimate, not romantic, not inappropriate, just human. "You remind me of her in some ways." She didn't know what to say to that. So she nodded and let the silence settle again. By the end of the day, neither of them spoke about it again. But something had shifted. A layer peeled back, a softness shared. That night, Hannah returned home later than usual. The house was quiet. Her daughter, Lily, was sprawled on the couch, book open on her chest, breathing evenly. Hannah knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. She didn't want to wake her. Instead, she leaned down and kissed her temple, and then sat on the floor beside the couch, holding her daughter's small hand in hers. She stayed like that for a long time, long. Because there are some days when silence speaks louder than comfort. And tonight, she needed both. It wasn't part of the schedule. Neither was getting caught in the rain with someone who understood silence as well as sorrow. The day had started like any other meetings, reports, half hearted coffee. A regional site visit to the next town over had been penciled into the calendar weeks ago, just another checkbox in an endless stream of to dos. But when the driver canceled last minute, and Grant glanced towards her desk with that quiet, measured look of his, Hannah had agreed to ride with him before she could think too hard. They didn't talk much during the drive. Vermont's back roads curved gently between bare trees and aging fences, the sky already heavy with clouds. The windshield wipers swayed slowly, a rhythmic hush-hush that filled the silence between them like a lullaby, the kind you didn't mind. The meeting itself passed uneventfully, numbers reviewed, nods exchanged, efficiency at its finest. But the weather had changed while they were inside. Rain came in fast, sharp, slanting sheets that blurred the world beyond the windows. As they pulled out of the clinic's parking lot, the storm swallowed the road ahead in gray. About 15 minutes into the drive, visibility dropped to a crawl. "We should stop," Grant said, his voice calm but decisive. Hannah nodded, eyes scanning for signs of shelter. It didn't take long. On the right, just past a row of silent pines, stood an old church white clapboard, steep roof, and a crooked wooden sign that read, "Whitestone Ridge Chapel, Est, 1892. The building looked like it had been forgotten by time, the kind of place you passed 100 times and never noticed. Grant pulled in slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Rain pounded on the roof as he parked, cutting the engine. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the storm smear the windshield in trembling streaks. Then, without a word, Grant stepped out into the rain. Hannah hesitated. He didn't look back to check if she'd follow. He just walked up the narrow path and pushed open the wooden door with a creak. She waited, fingers tightening around the seatbelt, breath fogging the window. Then she followed, inside. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of old wood and candle wax long since burned. The chapel was empty. No congregation, no choir, just rows of wooden pews and stained glass windows, dulled by time. Grant stood near the front, head bowed, not kneeling, not speaking, just still. She didn't approach. Instead, she lingered near the back, her coat damp around the shoulders, heart beating quietly in her chest. There was something sacred in the way he stood, not just in the place, but in the moment. He stayed there a while. Then, slowly, he turned, eyes meeting hers with a gentleness that caught her off guard. "I come here every year," he said softly. "Same day, same hour." Hannah stepped closer but didn't speak. "This is where she used to sing," he added, nodding towards the small platform at the front. "Every Sunday, even when she was too tired. She said singing here helped her forget the pain, just for a little while." His voice didn't crack, but there was weight behind it. "She had this idea," he continued, settling onto one of the pews, "that places remember us, that even after we're gone, some part of us stays behind in the walls, the floor, the air." Hannah sat beside him, leaving a respectful space between their shoulders. I never understood it, he said, until after. Rain tapped gently against the stained glass, each drop like a memory finding its way back. They sat there, side by side, not touching, not rushing. Hannah traced the grain of the wood beneath her fingers. My husband died in a car accident, she said, the words quiet, steady. Winter, black ice. I was making dinner when the call came. Grant turned slightly, not to interrupt, just to listen. I used to keep the last voicemail he left me. She added, played it every night just to hear his voice. Until one day, Lily erased it by accident. She was only 3. Her voice caught, just barely. I didn't get angry, just sat there for hours. Grant's breath was deep and even. Grief's a strange companion, he said. Some days it sleeps in the corner. Other days, it sits right beside you. She nodded. I used to think it would fade, she said. But now I think it just changes shape. He smiled faintly. Or maybe we learn how to carry it better. A long pause followed. Then he looked over, the corners of his mouth lifting just a bit. Thank you, he said. For what? For sitting with me, he replied. Most people are afraid of this kind of silence. I'm not, she said. They stayed there a while longer, letting the storm slow to a drizzle outside. By the time they returned to the car, the rain had softened, and the clouds were beginning to break open, just enough for the light to come through. As he pulled back onto the road, Grant glanced at her just once and smiled, not because something was funny, but because something had gently, unmistakably changed. He saw 2 men near her porch. She said they were just old friends. But something in her voice trembled like a secret begging to be kept. It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday afternoon. Grant had taken the scenic route home from the hardware store, an old habit he never questioned. The road curled past familiar houses, brittle trees shedding their final golden leaves, and the soft flicker of porch lights coming on before dusk. He hadn't meant to pass Hannah's street. He hadn't meant to slow down. But when he did, something made him stop. 2 men were standing near her porch, steps, leather jackets zipped halfway, hands buried deep in pockets. Hannah stood just inside her screen door, body angled as if shielding the threshold. Her arms were folded tightly, voice too quiet to hear. But her posture said enough. Grant couldn't explain the knot that formed in his stomach. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. There was tension in the space between them. Too much space, not enough ease. One of the men leaned in slightly, pointing at something near her feet. Hannah shook her head, then laughed nervously. A performance. And then she glanced over her shoulder, as if sensing something behind her. That's when Grant eased his car forward, turning the corner slowly. He didn't want her to see him watching. That night, he sat in his den, blinds half drawn, sipping tea he didn't want. The ginger didn't taste the same. His thoughts wouldn't settle. Around 10, without thinking too hard, he pulled up the security app linked to the Remedex building's external cameras. One camera faced the parking lot gate. Another installed recently captured a long stretch of sidewalk outside employee housing. At 9:46 p.m., the feed showed the same 2 men, standing still. Outside her home. They didn't knock. They didn't shout. Just stood. One lit a cigarette. The other checked his watch. They left after 6 minutes. That should have settled it. But it didn't. By Monday morning, Something inside Grant had changed. He told himself it was nothing, that she was allowed her privacy, that she didn't owe him answers. But the distance between what he told himself and what he felt began to widen. In the office, the rhythm they had found, the quiet ease, the shared glances, the silent trust began to slip. He stopped bringing tea. He began replying to her emails with clipped responses, sometimes forwarding tasks to other assistants. Meetings that once included her suddenly didn't. When she knocked on his door to clarify scheduling, he kept the conversation brief, eyes on his laptop, tone professional but detached. Hannah noticed. At first, she told herself he was just busy. CEOs had 1,000 things to juggle. Maybe she'd misread their closeness. Maybe she'd confused kindness for connection. But by midweek, the chill became unmistakable. He didn't look at her the same way, didn't pause before answering, didn't ask if she was okay when she coughed through a morning call. She felt it like a shift in weather, subtle at first, then undeniable. On Thursday, as they left a department briefing, she matched his stride in the hallway and asked, carefully, "Is everything all right?" Grant hesitated a beat too long before answering. "Fine," he said, just trying to keep focused. He didn't ask her how she was. That night, Hannah sat alone in her kitchen, watching the rain slide down the window panes. Lily was asleep upstairs. The leftover pasta on her plate had gone cold. She played the scene in her head over and over again. Had she said something wrong? Had she crossed a line? But more than that, she wondered what he saw in her that made him pull away so suddenly. And worse, what he might have guessed. Because the truth was, she hadn't told him everything. The men on her porch weren't just friends. They were remnants of a past life she never wanted to revisit, her ex-husband's debts, unpaid hands, and the kind of trouble that always found a way back, no matter how far you moved. She hadn't lied, but she hadn't shared either. Now she wondered if that silence had cost her something she didn't even realize she'd begun to need. Sometimes goodbye comes quietly in the form of a folded letter, left beside a cold cup of tea. It happened on a Friday. The sky over Bradford was an unrelenting gray, the kind that made the town feel smaller, more enclosed. A low-hanging silence blanketed the Remedex building, broken only by the occasional ringing phone or the soft scuff of shoes on polished tile. Hannah hadn't meant to overhear anything. She had gone upstairs to drop off a signed delivery receipt when she passed by the half-open door to the executive lounge. Grant's voice was unmistakable calm, measured, and painfully familiar. "She's capable, yes," he was saying, "but lately, I can't shake the feeling that there's something off. Like maybe there's more behind her attention than just duty." A pause. Then the assistant, someone from finance, she thought, replied, "You think she has an angle I don't know," Grant said. "I want to believe she doesn't. But after the other night, after what I saw, I just can't be sure anymore." Hannah froze in the hallway. Her fingers dug into the manila envelope she was holding, as if trying to ground herself in something real. She didn't stay to hear the rest. Back at her desk, her heart pounded in that terrible silent way, not in anger, but in something worse. Disbelief, disappointment, a dull ache that settled between her ribs and refused to move. It wasn't about the job, it was about being seen, finally, by someone she thought understood the silence she carried, only to realize he had drawn a different story entirely. She sat still for a long time. The office buzzed around her phones ringing, printers whirring, someone laughing 2 cubicles over. All of it sounded far away. Then, with hands that didn't tremble because she'd done this before, in harder ways, she pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began to write. The words came slowly, measured like everything else in her life. She didn't say much, just enough. Mr. Whitmore, please accept this letter as my formal resignation, effective immediately. I appreciate the opportunities Remedex has provided me. I hope my departure will not cause disruption. Thank you for your understanding, Hannah Cole. She folded it once, neat, careful, the way she used to fold Lily's school notes before tucking them into her lunchbox. Then she stood, no announcement, no goodbyes. Just a quiet gathering of her things, her notebook, the framed photo of Lily, the little ceramic dish Rachel had given her for paper clips before leaving. She paused at her desk and glanced once more at the space she had made her own. The peace lily near the window had started to lean, thirsty for water. She adjusted it gently, fingers brushing the curling edge of a leaf. She remembered the day she got hired 9 years ago. Her interview had been in this very building, though the paint was different back then. She had worn a blue blazer that no longer fit, hair pulled back so tightly it gave her a headache. Her daughter had just turned 2, and she'd barely slept the night before, rocking Lily through a cough and a fever. Back then, she had hoped only for a steady paycheck. She never expected to find safety, and certainly not warmth, but for a moment, she had. She left the resignation letter on Grant's desk just to the right of his laptop, beside a mug of tea gone cold. Ginger, she noted absently. The symbolism stung. She walked out without looking back. By the time Grant returned from his late lunch meeting, the office was quieter than usual. His assistant handed him a file, and a passing staffer mentioned that Hannah had left early, something about a family emergency. He entered his office and saw the envelope first. He didn't need to open it to know what it was, but he did anyway. His eyes scanned the words slowly. Then again, there was no anger in them, no blame, just distance, finality, a signature at the N that he recognized more deeply than he cared to admit. He sat down in his chair and stared at the letter for a long time, his fingertips resting lightly on the fold. She hadn't defended herself, hadn't tried to explain, and somehow that made it worse. Meanwhile, miles away, in the fluorescent lit hallway of St. Bernardine's Hospital, Hannah stood beside her mother's bed, watching the nurse adjust her IV drip. Mrs. Ellen Cole was barely conscious, her eyes flickering open only for seconds at a time. The doctor had called that morning. Another episode, memory loss, disorientation, elevated heart rate. We need to run more tests. Hannah had nodded, thanked them, and held her mother's hand, like it was the only thing still tethering her to the version of herself that knew how to keep going. She hadn't told anyone at the hospital she'd quit her job. Not yet. For now. The only thing that mattered was the warmth of her mother's skin, the gentle rhythm of machines beeping beside the bed, and the ache in her chest that told her she'd made the right choice, even if it hurt. Her desk was empty, her tea mug gone. All that remained was silence, and the memory of the woman who never asked for anything, not even a chance to explain. Grant stood in the middle of the office floor, hands loosely clasped behind his back. The room felt colder today, not by temperature, but by absence. Hannah's chair was pushed in neatly, the way she always left it. Her peace lily had been removed, and the photo frame that once held a picture of her daughter was no longer on the corner of the desk. It looked like she had never been there. And yet, somehow, her presence clung to everything in the way the paper trays were arranged just so, in the faint scent of lavender she sometimes wore, in the silence that replaced the quiet hum of her morning greetings. Grant exhaled slowly, unsure what to do with his hands, his thoughts, his regret. He sat in his office, the resignation letter still folded neatly beside his keyboard. He hadn't filed it, couldn't bring himself to. Every time he looked at it, his mind returned to the last few weeks, to her smile in the elevator, her laughter tucked behind politeness, her silence when he began pulling away. He hadn't asked, not once. He had drawn conclusions from shadows instead of light, interpreted distance where there had only been dignity. The knock on his door came softly. He expected an assistant, or perhaps someone from HR. Instead, it was a woman with warm eyes and rain-damp curls. She looked vaguely familiar. Mr. Whitmore. "Yes, I'm Rachel," she said, stepping inside. "Hannah's friend." She asked me to drop off some of her pending files. Just a few things she wanted to make sure didn't get left undone. Grant stood, unsure whether to thank her or apologize. He gestured towards the desk instead. "Of course. Thank you for bringing them." Rachel set the manila folder down gently, but she didn't leave right away. She didn't want to quit. Rachel said after a pause. She felt like she had to. Grant looked up, startled. "She wouldn't tell you that." Rachel continued, "But I will, because someone needs to know." He said nothing. "She's been taking care of her mother alone for years. Alzheimer's, some days. Mrs. Cole remembers her. Most days. She doesn't. And on top of that, Hannah's still cleaning up the mess her ex left behind. Debt collectors. Old loans in both their names. She's barely kept the lights on some months." Grant's fingers curled slowly against the edge of his desk. "She never asked for help. Not from you. Not from me. That's just who she is." He swallowed hard. Rachel's voice softened. "She spoke highly of you. You know. Said you were different. Said it felt like you saw her." He looked away. "I guess we all see what we want to," Rachel added, her voice gentle but clear. After she left, Grant remained seated. The room didn't move, but something inside him did. He thought of every moment he had missed, the extra hours she worked after meetings, the way her voice always stayed calm, even when her eyes looked tired. The morning she'd shown up with damp shoes, never mentioning the downpour, the cough he'd heard, and the tea he'd brewed once when he still trusted what he felt. He remembered, too, how quickly that trust had been replaced by suspicion. All it had taken was a shadow on her porch, and a silence he'd never tried to understand. He stood up suddenly, the chair groaning softly behind him. It was past business hours, but the thought wouldn't leave him alone. He took his coat and keys, and for once didn't care that the inbox wasn't empty. The fluorescent lights of St. Bernardine's Hospital cast a muted glow over the waiting room. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. Chairs lined the walls in tight rows. Magazines from 2 seasons ago sat in a crooked pile on the table. Grant stepped through the automatic doors and paused, unsure what he expected. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't planned what he would say. He only knew that some things couldn't be left unsaid. He spotted her almost immediately. Hannah sat alone in the far corner, one leg tucked beneath her head resting gently against the wall. Her hair was pulled back into a tired knot, her cardigan wrinkled at the sleeves. She looked smaller here, not fragile but quietly worn. Her eyes were closed, but not in sleep, just resting. He didn't approach yet. He stood near the entrance, watching her breathe, the rise and fall of someone who had carried too much for too long without complaint. For a moment, all he could do was stand there, hands in his pockets, heart in his throat. He had come to offer an apology. But what he hadn't expected was how much he needed her to hear it. He came to apologize. She never asked him to, and somehow that made it matter more. The waiting room at St. Bernadine's had emptied by evening, save for one nurse at the desk and the quiet hum of vending machines that offered more comfort by their glow than their contents. Hannah remained in her seat, arms folded loosely across her chest, eyes fixed on the same patch of linoleum she'd been staring at for over an hour. She didn't hear the door open. She only looked up when the scent of lavender drifted in subtle, calming, the kind that reminded her of the sachets her mother once kept in their dresser drawers, back when memories stayed longer than moments. Grant stood there, holding a brown paper bag and a small bouquet. Not roses, not lilies, lavender, bundled gently with twine. He didn't say anything at first, just walked over and placed the bag on the seat beside her, then sat down on the other side of it, not too close, not too far. The distance felt intentional, respectful. The paper rustled softly as she peeked inside. Soup, a half sandwich, a bottle of water. Nothing fancy, but warm, thoughtful. Still, she didn't speak. Neither did he. The silence, oddly enough, felt more honest than words might have. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in weeks, the man who sat beside her wasn't the guarded executive or the distant stranger. He was just a man, tired, maybe, but present. His suit jacket was folded over his lap. A light crease lined the corner of his shirt collar, his hands resting quietly, opened and closed once in a subtle rhythm, like he was steadying something inside himself. "I didn't know what to bring," he said finally, voice low. "I figured food was safe, and lavender. I remembered you had a hand cream with it once." The scent stuck. She smiled, faint but real. "My mother used it too." He nodded, glancing towards the hallway. "How is she?" Hannah looked away, her fingers curling around the paper bag. "Not great. The doctors say it's progressing faster now. She has more bad days than good." There was no tremor in her voice, but it was thin, like something holding back the weight behind it. Grant didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor between them. "I'm sorry," he said. She didn't move. "I didn't just misjudge you." "Hannah," he continued, his voice steady but softened. "I misjudged what love looks like the second time around." Those words lingered, not dramatic, not dressed up, just true. Hannah looked over at him, studied the line of his profile, the way his eyes held still when he spoke, the slight catch in his breath when he finished. She didn't cry, but something inside her gave way, not like a dam breaking, more like a door opening slow, careful, long overdue. Forgiveness, she said quietly, isn't for the person who hurt you. Grant turned to her, waiting. It's for the part of you that needs to stop carrying the weight of being misunderstood. They sat there, side by side, the sterile walls and buzzing lights fading into the background. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded note, not his, hers, her resignation letter. He looked at it, then placed it on the seat between them. I haven't submitted this, he said. I didn't expect you to come, she replied. I didn't expect a lot of things, he said. Silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. She opened the paper bag slowly, pulling out the sandwich. He watched as she took a bite, chewing with that kind of focus people use when trying not to cry. I wasn't asking for anything, you know, she said finally. Not pity, not rescue. I know. Just a little understanding. Grant nodded, swallowing whatever answer had tried to rise in his throat. You deserved that, he said. For the first time, Hannah looked straight into his eyes, not searching for answers, but offering something steadier peace. You listened now, she whispered. And he did, every pause, every breath between her words. The way her fingers gripped the cup of water, the soft tapping of her heel against the tile, it was all there. When the nurse called her name from the hallway, Hannah stood, clutching the lavender and the note in one hand, the bag in the other. She turned back once before heading toward her mother's room. You can go, she said, gentle but not dismissive. He stood too, uncertain. But if you want, she added, slipping a small torn scrap of paper from her cardigan pocket and placing it on his palm. Come visit again tomorrow. He looked down. The words were simple, scrawled in her neat, curved handwriting. Would be nice to not eat alone twice. His fingers closed around it slowly, as if afraid it might vanish. And this time, when he smiled, it wasn't out of relief or apology. It was hope. Some people visit hospitals out of duty. He returned out of something far deeper, regret wrapped in hope. The second time he came, he brought coffee 2 cups, one with extra cream and cinnamon, because she had once mentioned that bitter coffee gave her headaches. He didn't expect her to remember. But when she took the cup and smiled with that quiet sort of surprise, he knew she did. The third time, he brought a book of crossword puzzles and a folded local newspaper. I figured you'd want to keep your brain busier than the machines, he said with a soft chuckle, handing them to her with a small shrug. After that, the visits became routine, not arranged, not announced, just natural, like showing up had always been part of his day. Sometimes he sat in silence as she finished phone calls with doctors or navigated insurance papers. Other times, he helped organize the tangled cords of her mother's heart monitor or restack the magazines on the side table no one ever seemed to touch. He never lingered too long, never crossed a line, but his presence began to fill the corners of her world in ways she hadn't known were still empty. Her mother, Ellen, took notice. The first time she met him, she called him the nice man with tired eyes. The second time, she forgot his name, but remembered his kindness. By the fourth visit, she asked if he was family, and when Hannah said no, Mrs. Cole tilted her head, unconvinced. He's here more than some of mine ever were, she muttered, on a Thursday morning. One of those rare lucid hours found Ellen staring out the hospital window while Grant read softly from a book. Hannah was folding a sweater into her mother's overnight bag when the older woman spoke, her voice clear and unshaken. "He looks at you like you matter," she said simply. The room went still. Grant lowered the book slightly. Hannah froze mid-fold, eyes flicking toward her mother, whose gaze remained fixed on the light beyond the glass. "Don't waste that," Ellen added, softer this time. Then, as quickly as it came, the clarity slipped. She turned away, murmuring something about lilies blooming early this year. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. But something shifted after that. There was no grand confession, no sweeping gestures, only a deeper kind of closeness, the kind built not on attraction, but attention. Grant began learning the hospital routine, which vending machine dispensed the decent trail mix, what time the night nurse changed the IV bags, how to navigate the cafeteria line without getting stuck behind the resident interns. He also learned how Hannah liked her toast slightly burned, that she sometimes hummed when nervous, that she always reread the last line of any book before closing it, like saying goodbye to a friend. And Hannah, in return, noticed the way he always offered to carry her mother's coat, but never insisted, how he never interrupted, but always remembered what she had said the day before. How he asked questions, not because he didn't know the answers, but because he wanted to understand her world more deeply. The boundaries that had once defined their relationship titles, expectations, professional lines began to blur, not in the way of scandal or speed, but like two people slowly discovering that trust can be rebuilt not in leaps, but in footsteps. One evening, as the hospital wing dimmed into its nighttime hush, Hannah turned to him after her mother had fallen asleep. "Would you come with me somewhere this weekend?" she asked quietly. He looked up, brows raised slightly. Of course. They drove in silence for a while on Saturday morning. The windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of early fall. Leaves painted the road in faded golds and deep reds. A breeze carried the smell of earth and something lighter, floral, almost sweet. The old lavender farm sat just outside the town line, no longer in full bloom, but still breathing the memory of summers past. Long rows of faded purple stretched into the hills, their scent still rich in the air. "This is where my mom worked when she was younger," Hannah said, stepping out of the car. "She used to bring me here when I was little, said the scent could fix anything." They walked slowly, boots crunching on the soft gravel path. Birds chirped in lazy harmony above them. No one else was there. Grant reached down once to pick a loose stem of lavender, twirling it gently between his fingers before handing it to her. She didn't take it immediately, just watched him, eyes reflecting something between memory and possibility. "You didn't have to keep showing up," she said. "I know. But you did. I wanted to," he said, after a pause. "Not for answers, not for forgiveness, just to try again, differently." She took the stem from his hand. No dramatic moment followed, no kiss, no confession, just two people standing in the cool breeze of a place that held meaning for reasons neither fully explained aloud. But it was enough, because sometimes healing doesn't announce itself, it just begins. He didn't bring a ring. He brought a memory wrapped in the scent of lavender and second chances. The sun that afternoon had a softness to it, not the blazing heat of July, but the golden, lingering warmth of a September nearing its end. The lavender fields stretched wide beneath it, not in full bloom, but rich with the memory of summers past. Their muted purples, tinged with silver, swayed gently in the breeze, whispering old songs only the land remembered. Hannah walked slowly, her fingers brushing the tops of the lavender as she passed. The air smelled like calm, like healing, like something left behind that had quietly waited to be returned to. Grant trailed a step behind, his hands in his coat pockets. He wasn't nervous, not exactly, but his heart moved in a different rhythm today, slower, heavier, more deliberate. They reached a wooden bench near the far edge of the field, half hidden by a crooked oak, and weathered by time. Hannah sat first. He remained standing for a moment, looking out across the rows of fading lavender, then slowly took the seat beside her. There was silence, not the kind that needed to be filled, just the kind that asked to be felt. I haven't been back here in years, Grant said quietly. She looked at him. My wife used to love this place. He continued. We came here once, just after her first round of chemo. It was the only time that summer she felt strong enough to walk more than a few steps. He paused, the memory catching on something inside his chest. She stopped right there, he said, pointing gently toward a sun-drenched patch not far from the path, and said, when I'm gone, love again. But choose someone who sees you whole. Hannah's breath hitched not from sadness, but from something deeper. The weight of being seen, the ache of being chosen not out of loneliness, but clarity. She knew me, he said, voice low. All the messy parts, the parts that overthink, that close up when things get too real. And somehow, she still believed someone else could hold all that again. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small worn velvet box, faded green, edges frayed. He didn't open it right away, just held it in his palm. This isn't new, he said. It belonged to my mother. She wore it every day for 32 years. My father never replaced it, even after her passing. He said, why trade something that's already held a lifetime of love? He opened the box. Inside, a delicate gold ring rested on ivory satin. The band was thin, etched with vines tiny, almost imperceptible like roots, winding their way through something ancient and strong. He didn't kneel. He didn't ask her for forever. He just turned to her, eyes steady. This time, he said, let's build something from the ground up. Hannah didn't speak. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, still, as if her whole body was holding the moment, afraid to break it. For a woman who had spent so long bracing for loss, this quiet offering felt like a miracle too gentle to be real. No grand promises, no declarations of always, just presence, honest, humble, unwavering. She reached out slowly and touched the ring with the tips of her fingers. The gold was warm from his hand, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. I don't know what comes next, she said softly. You don't have to, he replied. She nodded once, not in certainty, but in courage. Then, with quiet hands, she lifted the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger. It didn't sparkle. It didn't shout. It simply settled like it had been waiting all along. Grant said nothing more. He didn't need to. They sat there for a while longer, watching the shadows stretch across the lavender. Birds flew low, dipping between the rows. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime from the old farmhouse tinkled softly. As the sun slipped below the hills, Hannah stood and reached for his hand. He took it, no hesitation, just a gentle, steady grip, and together they walked back through the field, not toward a beginning or an ending, but toward something that had no name, just a promise. One carried not in words, but in the quiet way their fingers stayed laced, long after the last light faded. When she returned, her desk wasn't the same, because she wasn't the same. The Remedex building looked exactly as it had when she left, same gray floors, same flicker in the overhead light near the elevator, same scent of coffee that had brewed a little too long. But as Hannah stepped inside, something in her chest shifted. The weight she once carried here, the invisible armor of politeness, of distance, of holding everything together, had lightened, not disappeared, just changed. She no longer walked like someone trying not to be noticed. Now, she moved like a person who had come home, not to a place, but to herself. The new office wasn't far from where her old desk had been, but it felt worlds away. A small glass plaque on the door read, Employee Wellness and Support, Hannah Cole, Director. She smiled at the title not out of pride, but quiet affirmation. This wasn't a promotion, it was a purpose. Inside, the space had been furnished simply soft lighting, a shelf with books on mental health and family care, a couch near the window, and a bulletin board already filling with thank you notes, some typed, some scribbled in crayon. A single photo sat on her desk, Lily, arms outstretched in front of a science fair project made of pipe cleaners and glitter. Next to it was the peace lily she had taken home months ago. Somehow, it looked healthier now. She took a breath, sat down, and let the silence settle. This wasn't the beginning of something, nor was it a return. It was a continuation, a new chapter, built from everything that came before. By mid-morning, her inbox was full, not with demands, but stories. Notes from employees needing help with transportation during chemo. A nurse asking about therapy coverage. Someone from maintenance requesting a quiet place to call his daughter during lunch breaks. Hannah responded to each message slowly, thoughtfully, not just with information, but with care. Midday. She visited the second floor break room, something she rarely did in her old role. The scent of tomato soup wafted through the hallway, and laughter spilled from the vending machine corner. A little boy sat near the microwave, kicking his feet against the chair legs. His mother, a technician from radiology, stood nearby, chatting with another employee. The boy looked up as Hannah passed, then whispered, not very quietly, Mom, is that man her boss? Hannah turned, curious. The boy pointed across the room, where Grant had just walked in, carrying 2 cups of tea and nodding to a few staff members as he passed. His eyes met Hannah's for a moment, soft, knowing before he turned to hand a tea to someone at reception. Hannah bent down to the boy's level and smiled. No, she said gently. He's just the man who believed in me. The boy grinned, then returned to slurping his juice box. That afternoon, she met with one of the newer employees, a woman named Diane from payroll. Diane had been missing more days lately, and her supervisor had gently suggested she stop by the wellness office for a chat. They sat together on the couch by the window. I'm not sure why I'm here, Diane said, arms folded tightly, voice brittle. That's okay, Hannah replied. You don't have to know. There was a long pause. Then, Slowly, Diane exhaled, her shoulders dropped an inch. My husband was diagnosed last month. Liver failure. They said 6 months, maybe less. The words hung there. I didn't want anyone to think I was using work as a reason to fall apart. She added, "You're not," Hannah said. "You're doing the bravest thing anyone can do, showing up." Diane's eyes filled, and Hannah reached over, gently offering a tissue. "We have a support fund now," she said, "for employees going through medical or caregiving crises. You qualify, and we can also connect you with family counseling." Diane stared at her. "I didn't even know that existed." "It does." Hannah smiled. "Sometimes, all we need is for someone to remember that we exist too." By the time Diane left, her face looked softer, her breath steadier. She turned at the door and said, "Thank you for not treating me like I was fragile." "You're not," Hannah replied. "You're human." As the day wound down, Hannah returned to her desk and opened her laptop. A quiet calm had settled inside her, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of meaning. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office floor. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. A printer beeped. Life continued. Then her screen blinked. A new email. From Grant Whitmore, subject, "Dinner tonight, bring Lily." She stared at it for a second, then leaned back in her chair, letting the simplicity of the message settle. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Dinner tonight, bring Lily. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a plan. It was an invitation to keep building together. She hit reply. "We'd love to." She's been practicing her knock-knock jokes, so consider yourself warned. She hit send. Then she closed the laptop, watered the peace lily, and walked out, not as a woman holding on, but as someone ready to let in. The story began with a mistake, but ended exactly where it was meant to be. The garden behind Hannah's house wasn't grand. There were no marble arches, no cascading floral arrangements, or crystal chandeliers. Just rows of sunflowers leaning toward the late afternoon light. Strings of soft white lights draped between old trees, and wooden benches lined neatly on the grass, worn at the edges, but sturdy. A light breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the faintest trace of lavender from a planter near the porch steps. Hannah stood in front of a narrow mirror in the hallway, her hair half pinned with simple silver combs, the fabric of her pale blue dress flowing softly around her legs. Lily buzzed in and out of the room like a hummingbird, her floral crown slightly crooked and her dress shoes already scuffed from twirling. "You look like a fairy," Hannah said, adjusting the crown gently. Lily beamed. "And you look like someone in a movie?" Hannah laughed, but the moment sobered quickly, her reflection staring back, not as a woman pretending to be brave, but one who had become it, quietly, step by step. Outside, chairs filled slowly, friends, neighbors, a few Remedex employees who had become something more than co-workers. Rachel sat beside Ellen, whose shawl was wrapped snugly around her shoulders, her fingers laced calmly in her lap. She didn't speak much these days, but today, she had smiled when the music began to play. That was more than enough. Grant stood near the garden arch, dressed not in a tuxedo, but in a soft gray suit, no tie. Sleeves rolled just slightly, like he never planned to impress, only to be real. His eyes scanned the garden slowly, not nervously, but gratefully. When Hannah walked toward him, Lily just ahead tossing lavender petals from a small wooden basket. It felt less like a performance and more like coming home. They met beneath the arch. No officiant, no podium, just them. They had agreed on something small, something quiet. "I've written something," Grant began, voice steady, gaze fixed on hers. "It's not perfect, but neither am I." A soft chuckle passed through the small crowd. He held her hands gently, his thumb brushing hers. "I promise to listen without trying to fix, to stay, even when the silence stretches too long, to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind. And when the hard days come, I promise to still choose you, gently, again and again." Hannah blinked slowly, then smiled. She pulled a folded card from the bodice of her dress. "Mine is shorter," she said, and laughter rippled again. "I promise to build slow, to love steady, to not need everything to be sparkly, just safe, not perfect, but patient, not flashy, but forever." There were no rings exchanged that day, not because they didn't matter, but because symbols had already found their place in their lives long before vows were spoken. When they kissed, simple, soft, certain, Lily clapped the loudest. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone and the sky had turned a deeper shade of blue, Hannah wandered into the living room barefoot, dress hem grazing the floor, a warm cup of tea in her hand. She looked around the room, quiet now except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the porch swing swaying on its own. Her eyes landed on the small wooden bookshelf in the corner, the one Grant had helped her assemble months ago. And on the second shelf, nestled between a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and an old photo album, was The Art of Stillness, the very book Grant had been reading that morning in the cafe, when she had mistaken him for a blind date. She smiled, pulling the book gently from the shelf. It still had the birthday card inside to Mom, the one that had unraveled everything. She placed it on the coffee table beside a framed photo of their wedding in the garden. Grant, mid-laugh. Hannah leaning in close, Lily holding a bouquet twice her size. She set her tea down, then curled up on the couch, pulling a soft knit blanket over her legs. The front door creaked, tea still warm. Grant asked from the doorway. "Barely," she said, eyes closed, voice light. He walked in, sat beside her, and gently laced his fingers through hers. They didn't speak for a while, didn't need to. Sometimes, peace doesn't arrive in grand gestures or thunderous endings. It slips in through open windows, through lavender breezes and quiet promises, through years that rebuild what was once broken. And sometimes it leaves behind a story not extraordinary, but enduring. The kind you keep retelling, the kind that makes you believe again. Hannah leaned her head on Grant's shoulder. "And to think," she whispered, "it all started with a cup of coffee and a mistake worth making. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships begin not with fireworks, but with quiet moments, a cup of coffee, a kind gesture, or even a simple mistake." This story reminds us that healing isn't always loud. It happens slowly, often in the background of everyday life, in shared silences, thoughtful acts, and second chances we never expected. Hannah and Grant didn't fall in love because life was perfect. They connected because they both knew loss and chose to believe in love again anyway. As we grow older, it becomes easy to think that some doors have closed for good, that our best years or our greatest loves are behind us. But life has a way of surprising us, especially when we allow ourselves to be open, honest, and vulnerable. The true message is simple but profound. It's never too late to begin again, not with someone else, not with ourselves, not with life. So keep showing up with grace, with courage, with hope, because sometimes the mistake we feared becomes the moment that heals. Thank you for spending your precious time with this story. If it touched your heart even just a little, we hope you'll help us share it. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It's a small click, but it means the world to us and helps these stories reach more hearts in need of hope. Until next time, take care of yourself and those quiet, beautiful parts of your heart.